I'm going to refer to Dr. Pak interchange with as Colonel Pak. That's important because when I first started working with Dr. Pak, I was also heading up U.S. Marine Corporation, our fishing company, and we would usually abbreviate it U.S. Marine Corp. And one time I had to fly to Seattle and rent a car, and we had a corporate rental car, and the reservation agent there at the desk looked down and he said, U.S. Marine Corps, are you here on orders? I said, yes, Colonel Pak sent me. And he said, okay, 40% off. So then I realized the power of Dr. Pak. I joined the church just after Mike Leone in 1969 in San Francisco. Mike always reminds me of that. So. I first began working with Dr. Pak and True Father in 1973. I moved to New York and I was asked to connect with the United Nations and arrange for the Little Angels performance there that December, which Father was given a standing ovation. And that really began a long career, 33 years working in various businesses directly related to our movement. And, you know, everything really started to heat up as far as the church and the persecution after Watergate and the Nixon rallies and Father's speech at Madison Square Garden. The media attacks, investigations started at one time or another. We were investigated by the IRS, the FBI, the CIA, the Immigration Service, Department of Justice, Customs, Postal Service, SEC, Federal Reserve, U.S. Congress, as well as state governments, investigated True Parents, Dr. Pak, and the church. Sorry I've left out any government agency. I'm sure I'll hear from them. I have the fortune of being in charge of media and then legal affairs during a lot of that time. And so I would get, I was able to appear at many depositions, investigations, criminal grand juries, etc. To the point when people said, Mike, you have to go witness, I thought they meant go testify to a formal hearing before lawyers when they would say witness. And then when I did have time to witness, I would go out and someone would ask me a question. After a couple times of that, I would plead the Fifth Amendment. I can't talk, I can't say anything. So that's why I had rather strange time. Even one time I was representing Dr. Pak with lawyers handling a lawsuit against one of the nonprofits we had, and my garbage was being stolen every morning, I found out later, by private investigators. Because the paper would often say about my office, nobody knows what's going on there. It's run like a CIA government operation, which is exactly how I wanted it. Members would come up and say, I've heard your name, but I don't know what you do. And I would say, let's leave it there, or else I might have to kill you. So, in 1976, I flew with True Parents, Dr. Pak, to Washington, D.C. to hire True Father's first lawyer for his tax. We had just gotten a subpoena for True Parents, for True Father, for his tax case, which went on for a long time, and I worked over 6 years on that case. And anyway, in the course of working with Dr. Pak, as everyone has said, he was so ready to bring us up to East Garden. And, you know, True Parents had, I call it, kind of famous breakfast meeting starting at 7 a.m. every morning. And I would often go up to be there with Dr. Pak when he was giving reports. And sometimes I would get there early and Dr. Pak wasn't there yet. And it was, you know, kind of quiet. Other leaders were there. True Parents were sitting at the head of the table, and other leaders were there, but it was kind of quiet and subdued. And then Dr. Pak would suddenly come a little bit late. Briefcase, stack of papers, and sit down push himself in as close as he could up to true parents and begin to report. And suddenly Father's face would steadily brighten up, and everything was getting exciting, and people were laughing and smiling. And I realized what a tremendous, wonderful effect he had on true parents. And one time I was sitting close to, or next to Dr. Pak, up close to true parents, and we had just come back, I think, from one of our, I'm going to get into this, some of this if I have time, one of our business trips, and he said, "Mike, give Father a report." So I started out what I thought was, it was measured, because that's who I am, from the Midwest, kind of monotone, speaker, and of course nervous around true parents, true fathers. So kind of measured, but I thought truthful, objective report, and short. And as I got to the end, Dr. Pak stood up and he said, "That's not everything." And then he began to give his report. And it was getting like this, and like this, and like that. And I thought, were we at the same event? But Father was a lot happier hearing his report. And I just realized, the amount of joy. And this is, you had to understand, how to deal with that, and how to report to Father and bring joy to Father, the artistic communication that Dr. Pak had with true parents. And so in 1977, we started seafood processing. I'll try to get through this very quickly, not make it too complicated. We started a seafood processing land-based. And as I mentioned in that car rental trip, Father had asked me to head up the fishing company, U.S. Marine Corporation. And so we were both very much involved in that business. We visited aging shipyards together on the West Coast, fishing vessels in various locations, even Dutch Guyana and Trinidad. And sometimes we would be in fish freezers so long that I'd see, looking at him, and I'm sure that for me, as icicles were forming on our hair and our eyebrows before we walked out of the freezer. And in those situations, Dr. Pak always treated everyone we met, and this is, the same has been said, with that gracious, polished, always courteous demeanor. He made everyone feel important that he met. And the fishing seafood environment, it was interesting, because it was often populated by tough-looking and talking individuals. So, cutting ahead, True Father really wanted us to buy a boatyard because he wanted to build boats, as you may know, and then start our commercial fishing industry, which now is especially in the Gulf Coast, or the Bering Sea of Alaska, and I'll mention that briefly in a minute. And so Dr. Pak and I flew to Mobile, Alabama, and drove down to the Gulf Coast to look for a boatyard. But half the phone book, and this was the town that was made famous by Labatt, Alabama, in the movie Forrest Gump. That town was populated for generations by Cajun fishermen. Half the phone book was filled with the same last name. Apparently cousins married cousins. And they didn't like strangers, even people living as close as Mobile, 20 miles away. So finding a boatyard willing to sell to a former Korean military attaché and his Midwestern sidekick, I knew was not going to be easy. Eventually, we found a real estate office that was willing to help us, and the agent pointed to some vacant land. There was no boatyard there because we weren't having trouble finding. We'd rather have an existing company. Vacant land that was several hundred acres, and I was standing with Dr. Pak, and we were looking at the map, and I could see Dr. Pak was getting excited about making this purchase. And so I said, and in my kind of Western logical, practical mind, I said, "Dr. Pak, most of this land looks like it's underwater. It's an estuary." And Dr. Pak raised his shoulders, and I had had other experiences, raised his shoulders, took in a deep breath and let his breath out and said, "Mike, we can't leave here without bringing something back to true parents." So we bought that, and I realized how much he was there. I was thinking on the practical side, but he really wanted to bring something back to true parents to inspire him. And as it worked out, it was very good because the town went ballistic on us. Dr. Pock and I were written up in the New Yorker magazine for being down there by a famous humorist, Calvin Trillin. They formed, the town, which was 2,500, had a rally of over 1,000 people. They formed Concerned Citizens of the South. They claimed that we would steal their children, eat their babies, use tax-exempt labor, not necessarily in that order. And so we would, in essence, take over the town. So in the midst of all this controversy, while they were focused on the land across from the river where we wanted to buy the boatyards, we heard that there was a man in town, owner in town of a small boatyard, but a well-respected one, that was interested in talking about selling it to us. So we went back to Alabama. We drove down this narrow road, poorly paved road, to this metal shack, second floor where the owner was. He was on the second floor and he could look out over everyone. He chewed tobacco. I think he had a bottle of whiskey in his lower drawer. He wore a t-shirt, big pot belly. And we were there dressed like this, suit and ties, and we sat down in these narrow metal chairs across from his desk. And periodically he would spit into his bucket near his desk, and he looked at us sitting there and he said, "City boys, huh?" And Dr. Bach began to speak to him with utmost respect, almost as though he was talking to President Reagan, Queen Elizabeth, or President Gorbachev from his long diplomatic career. No difference. He said, "Sir, you have a first-class boatyard here, and we've heard that you're one of the most respected businessmen in Baila Batra. You know, we're interested in buying your boatyard." A wad of tobacco left his mouth, arched in the air, sailed up and hit the wastebasket as he stared at us. Then he spoke. "I want a 2-page contract. No 30-page thing drawn up by lawyers, and pay me $50,000 of the sale price in cash when we close the deal. And come back in a few weeks after I see your 2-page contract. Come after dark when all the other boatyards are closed, and I'll let you look at my books, not before. Remember to bring the cash and we'll sign the contract. 2 pages. That's my offer, take it or leave it." We agreed right there on the spot. Several weeks later, we waited in cars just outside of town, some like abandoned gas station there on a corner. And the sun was going down. We started up our engines and a caravan. We slowly moved with lawyers, CPAs, to town in our bag of cash. And we closed that deal. And we owned that, and that was the beginning of really our fishing business, which is now earning, I've heard, over $100 million a year in the Bering Sea, and giving back a lot of money to support HSA's activities. Thank you. And I'll tell you, that deal, they don't teach this in Harvard Business School, how to do that kind of deal. That was really beginning of the church building, boat building business. And as I say, I'm really happy after all the challenges. We made many mistakes over the years, but we stayed with it and we overcame those challenges. And it is very successful. All started in that little metal shack in Alabama. Okay, skipping ahead real quick. Do I still have a few minutes? A few, okay. And so we were getting accused by the newspapers of, and we were continuing to invest in properties, all with based on Father's vision, real estate, various seafood companies. And money was coming from Japan. And Dr. Pak was here, UCI, and I was the next level, which owned the company. He was receiving donations, would send them down. Mike, send money here, send money there. It was all happening very quick. And then we started the Washington Times, and the Washington Post accused us of negatively influencing the government and the Washington Times. So Dr. Pak bought a few shares in the Washington Post and issued a statement saying he would not try to influence the Washington Post's editorial content, and actually published that, I think, in the newspapers. So very quickly, one day I got a call then, and Dr. Pak's house was in McLean, Virginia, where my office was also. One day I got a call that Dr. Pak had been kidnapped, come up to East Garden right away. And so I got up there, and True Mother and other leaders were there, and we discussed that they had already gotten phone calls demanding ransom and a recording of Dr. Pak's voice. And so we decided we still needed, and they said, don't call anybody, but we talked to some security firm, and they said, no, call the FBI, which we did. Jim Gavin was there helping very much at the time. And so FBI agent came in, the lead team of the kidnapping team came in, and we had tremendous support because Dr. Pak was chairman, publisher of the Washington Times, and we had supported Reagan. This was in 1984 when Reagan was president. And so FBI agents from my office, his house, everything was under surveillance up the East Coast, the East Garden, plus the kidnapping team came into East Garden where the phone calls were coming, set up shop. Tall guy with FBI agent came in, gun holstered on his belt, turned to me, shrugged, and said, boy, I hope we're more successful this time. I've lost my last two. And so we set up in the basement. We wired the phones. We wired the phones and everything to trace the calls. And with a junction box outside, and then we're waiting for the call. Finally, we got a call from a next door neighbor who said, I think we're getting some calls that are supposed to go to your house. And so they'd made a mistake in the wiring and had gone to a neighbor's house. So we thought, and we're getting on 2 days, Dr. Pak's gone, and we haven't been able to talk to them, so we don't know what's going on. But what had happened, Dr. Pak had been lured outside of Grand Hyatt Hotel in New York City. He had dismissed his security team because several Korean men had promised they could help Dr. Pak, who really wanted to get True Father clemency or a pardon to be released from Danbury, where he was at the time. So we were really worried where it was, but it turned out Dr. Pak, anyway, had been alerted into this car, suddenly in the backseat, handcuffed, blindfolded, thrown on the floor of the car, and driven 50 miles up to upstate New York to a large house there on a kind of estate, big property. Nobody knew what was going on, and in the property he could hear triggers being pulled. They were using electric prods on him. They were talking about killing him and his whole family if he didn't get the money. And so we're up there really worried about this. We didn't know all this at the time, and suddenly the phone rings. I answer it, and in the same voice, looking down in Alabama, I heard, Mike, I just got home, and there's several FBI agents sitting in my living room. And I said, well, yeah, of course, Dr. Pak, we had to do whatever we could. So he was really dazed, and they had really frightened him. One of the kidnapping members was a very dangerous man. And right after Dr. Pak flew, what had happened was Dr. Pak I jumped ahead a little bit. Dr. Pak, it turned out, had convinced the kidnappers he was the only one that could wire the money, and that they needed to put him on a plane from New York to Washington, D.C., a short flight, and they did that. And that's why he was at his home. And so, meanwhile, the most violent kidnapper had flown to Japan and was then calling Dr. Pak back at his home, threatening him and his family. And so Mike McDivitt, East Garden, head of our East Garden security, flew right away to Japan, to Tokyo, to meet with the FBI agent. Every major large city at that time, they had an FBI liaison agent there. And so he met to meet with the agent and give him details about what happened with the kidnapping, because we wanted this man arrested and brought back, extradited to the U.S. So he went to dinner with the FBI agent. When he sat down to dinner, the FBI agent, first thing he looked at him, he said, "Do you know a member in the Unification Church by the name of Mike Runyon?" And Mike froze, like, what did he do now? So then the agent said, and finally Mike said, yes. He said, "Mike Runyon witnessed to me when he was first a church member, and I was in college in San Francisco." Full circle. And he said, "I'll help you whatever I can do. We'll get this man," which they did, extradited him, and he went to prison. So that was, we never know what kind of seeds we plant, and we never know when Pat Hickey's going to stand up and come out with the hook. We never. So I'm basically finished. Dr. Pak meant so much to me, his support and his love. When I had all these media and investigations, I was going to all these things. I mean, when I joined the church, I was kind of a guy that panicked all the time and everything. I mean, this was a perfect position for me, right? But without Dr. Pak's love and support, I never could have gotten through this. And so, in closing, I just want to say I love you all, and Dr. Pak, God bless you. We love you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.